Hey everybody, it's Moshin Mikey, co-host of the Rock and Roll Roundtable on the Moshin channel on Rumble and YouTube with another episode of Mosh Bagosh. It's my personal sideshow on my journey through music in my lifetime and just the general consensus of what I listen to up till now in my life. Just a side gig I do for shits and giggles, basically. Here to get some more content on the channel. So, but we left off last time. Hopefully, you've watched the first three or four episodes. We had the '70s, the '80s, the '90s. So now we're in episode 4, which would be the 2000s era. In the 2000s, uh, I was pretty much locked into what I was listening to, post grunge kind of thing, and not really into the new metal yet. Like Linkin Park was kind of not a heavy rotation, but they were there. I listened to Godsmack and stuff like that. About that time, and the band was going. The band I was in was just writing. We weren't really doing a lot, so I had a little more time to listen to different kinds of music, which was great in a sense, and it's also a curse because you still can't keep up with everything that goes on as far as music goes in the world. But when the 2000s kind of came and new metal was hitting, with Slipknot being a major player. I mean, I consider bands like Korn and that to be new metal, but they had started in the mid early 90s. But the new metal kind of pushed with Linkin Park kind of heading out, but you had two different spectrums there. Linkin Park, which is not really metal to me, but you had Slipknot come out in '99, so that was kind of the introduction. And some bands that came out in the 2000s for the new metal, like Disturbed and Godsmack and 3 Days Grace, would come out in the 2000s and stuff like that. But, to be honest, I listened to that stuff as a background. I was still listening to like the 80s music and the grunge and the classic stuff and the '90s alternative, which I liked a lot. But when I got into 2000s, something else hit. And, that was about the emo phase came through. And I've said this before that my kids were more into the emo than I was to start with. And it was later in the decade when I really got hooked on kind of that sound. The most important album of the emo stretch to me, and probably, be honest, my favorite album of the 2000s was by a little known, now defunct band called Gwen Stacy. And they had an album called The Life I Know. And I love that album. I still love that album. And it's got all kind of bangers on it from start to finish. And it's what got me motivated to listen to more of the, whether you ever want to call it post what do they call it, post grunge or post hardcore, some people call it, and emo, a lot of other people call it. I mean, emo and post hardcore and all that stuff have very fine lines between being the same. I mean, there's really not a lot of difference. But bands like My Chemical Romance came out, and they were one of the more popular emo bands. They had songs like "I'm Not Okay" and what Teenagers, and of course, "Welcome to the Mayday Parade" and "Helena," which is my favorite. Yeah, just a bunch of bangers from them. But bands like the Foo Fighters were out too, and they were, been around for a while, but they were getting more play in the early 2000s. Bands like Gojira that weren't, they were started in the mid '90s, but they were escalating more into the 2000s. Uh, like I said, 3 Days Grace. So I got a list of just bands so I can refresh my memory some, but Alter Bridge was one I missed on. because I didn't really talk about Creed much either, because I was somewhat of a Creed fan in the late '90s, yes. And with like I said, sometimes you get caught up and forget a band or two. And Creed, as we know, making a big comeback in the last couple years, touring, and but the Alter Bridge came out in the 2000s, and they had some of the best songs. I mean, that was that Blackbird, I think, is one of their biggest ones. My favorite is If Tomorrow Comes, When Tomorrow Comes. Yeah, and Miles Kennedy was definitely he's a stellar singer, but Tremonti is a great guitar player, and he has his solo projects. Tremonti, hell, he even does crooner music. Mark Tremonti and Lizzie Hale are probably pretty close as the most overall talented hard rock to metal musicians that we have right now. I mean, just going on an overall basis. Lizzie can do anything. She did Skid Row music. She does her own. She's an excellent singer. She plays guitar. Tremonti does everything. He does Creed, Alter Bridge, his own music, his own solo stuff, and he croons. So yeah, he's an incredibly talented dude, man. And it's like, but Alter Bridge doesn't get the love like they probably should. And I'm guilty. I don't know that I've sat down and listened to an entire Alter Bridge CD, which is really shame on me. And it's really probably a travesty and a tragedy that I haven't. And that's gonna have to be homework for me, because I seen that band. I said, man, how do I forget about Alter Bridge? Because the songs I've heard I really like, but I just don't gravitate to going out and listening to them. And I know I should. Now there's some bands on here like Red Hot Chili Peppers. Nah, I'm not a fan. I just, Soul to Squeeze I really like, and some of their stuff was, I mean, catchy. Yeah, funkadelic. I'm not a funk guy really. I never a giant Rage Against the Machine fan either. And I mean, I liked them. I thought some of their grooves were just nasty, in the dirt kind of stuff, and I love that shit, but just not enough to make it a daily listening to me. Nightwish, and that symphonic metal was more active in the late '90s, early 2000s, and of course you had all the Pearl Jams, and Wolf Mother came out in 2000, which they had are kind of like a one hit wonder to me, but I think in Australia and stuff they're still pretty big, and I know they're still around. They still do stuff. Me and Skeeter have talked about the band Kitty, who I think had the best metal album of 2024. And they were, they come out around 96, 97, but 2000s when they kind of took it out, they kind of made their name and did like Ozfest or whatever they did. And they were kind of brutal for some females that we hadn't really heard before. So they kind of paved the way for other bands to come after them. And there's some bands that were hitting that I didn't like I talked about, Red Hot Chili Peppers. System of a Down's another one. I never really listened to. I bought Toxicity because I liked that song, and Aerials I do like. Not, Chop Suey was okay when it came out, but I wasn't into their other stuff like Sugar and weird, kind of the weird stuff they had earlier. Never really latched on to the whole style of System of a Down, but a lot of people do. And I was a Kill Switch Engage fan. I loved when Howard Jones. I ain't gonna be nothing against Jesse, but Howard Jones was in the band. It took a different feeling for me. And Howard Jones is a talented guy. It's a shame that none of his other projects really took off, like Light the Torch. But Killswitch was definitely on my radar in the mid 2000s. So they were definitely there. Breaking Benjamin was another one. They were in that Godsmack category to me. The Godsmack, Disturbed, all that. They're kind of right there with Chevelle, and all those bands that were heavy enough. They were usually tuned in C or drop C or something, but they didn't come across as this blazing in your face metal band, which is what they were probably shooting for. They like to have hits too. I mean, people like to be popular. It's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think that was their full reasoning. I think it was just how it came out. And a lot of those bands, Papa Roach had been around for a while, but they became more relevant in the 2000s with new metal. They kind of lumped themselves, coincidentally or not, or maybe purposely, I don't know, into the new metal category. And one of my wife's favorite bands, and I've seen them a few times, and I really like most of their stuff. Came out right at the turn was Shinedown. Shinedown. Brent Smith is one of the best fucking singers ever. And I know me and Skeeter had a show about the best rock vocalists. He was on my list, but he didn't make Skeeter's. He's not a big Shinedown fan, and we had to compromise. I don't know, maybe he's not top 10, but he was in my top 15, I think. But he's very talented guy. The rest of the whole band is, but Stone Temple Pilots were still relevant. Bands like that were still hanging around, kind of like the hair bands did when they went into the 90s, with some of the best albums from the hair bands being 90s albums. You had the same thing with grunge and alternative 90s. They kind of slowly seeped into the 2000s too. I mean, just because you're originated in 95 or whatever doesn't mean you're going to hit 95. You might hit in 2010. Who knows? But it's just what I was listening to. But the emo stuff, well, here's another one, Steel Panther. How long they've been around. And a lot of the hair people don't like Steel Panther because they like to poke fun at it. I like Steel Panther. I think they're a comic relief, but they're talented. And when I saw them live, I thought they were great. Live. Let's go through some of the other ones here. And at the time, I guess I gotta say, I'm always listening to my standbys. I'm always listening to my Rats, Poison, Dokken, Queensryche, Rush, all that good stuff. And even through the '90s, I was Nirvana's a fan for the first couple albums, heavy, and then In Utero was a little less, and then of course Kurt died in the mid '90s, and I wasn't as much of a fan of any of the other hair bands as maybe uh, I was like Dokken. So I had Dokken was probably high on my list still, and of course they had the Nirvana was still played pretty consistently on my end. So I didn't leave, man. Weezer always, the Blue Album will always be played no matter what till I'm dead in the ground or wherever I may end up. Now you had bands that were like Metallica, Megadeth, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. All those guys were still banging. They were still relevant. They were still doing their thing. So again, it's a potpourri and a hard to do ADHD style. Just like I do the shows ADHD. That's how I do music. I go from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and it's back. I latch onto something for a little while, then I do. And I think it was 2007 or 8 when Gwen Stacy came out. So that was the thing that sent me into the last few years of the decade, maybe more of emo, metal, core, post-hardcore, whatever the fuck you want to call it, kind of person. But in this time frame, in the 2000s, 2006 is when the band I was in really kicked back in. We started to do more work on new stuff. We were playing shows again, and that kind of kick-started all that. So I kind of left researching newer bands kind of in the dirt. And not on purpose. It's just because that's how I like to write. I like to be kind of free of influence, but of course I still had to listen to all the old stuff, which I knew we weren't going to try to sound like Bon Jovi, but we ended up not sounding like Bon Jovi, but the heaviness scale is probably Bon Jovi Godsmack combination. It was never real heavy, but it was melodic more and kind of straightforward music. And yeah, that's where we went in the late 2000s with the albums that came out. But a couple of the best albums we actually did came out in 2008. I think was an album called Big Rock by Laughing Cattle. It was a good album. Had a lot of good songs on it. And we had different lineups during that. We had a couple different lineups in the 2000s. Went to a five-piece, back down to a four-piece. It was kind of a hectic, chaotic time. I was working second shift at that time, second or third. I can't remember which one, probably a little bit of both. So I had to really devote my time. I had my kids on the weekends. So I was a single dad on the weekends and stuff. And well, I was married again. I shouldn't say single dad, but though I had kids on the weekends and then I had some kids all the time. And it was hectic. 2000s was a little bit hectic towards the end. And every other band that I didn't pick up on, it was pretty much a mellow year for new finds for me until I heard the Gwen Stacy album. Once I heard the Gwen Stacy album, I had to read back to Asking Alexandria's early stuff. A Day to Remember, My Chemical Romance, I talked about. You had bands like Black Veil Brides out coming out at that time. Escape the Fate was a one my kids listened to. I never really listened to them. There was one called Sleeping with Sirens that I never gave much love back in the day, and I just saw them in the summer at the festival I went to, and they were badass. So it's like, yeah, I still missed, even though I'd heard them a million times. I've heard their name a million times, Sleeping with Sirens, but I never checked them out. And again, my fault. My ADHD kicks in and I'm done. I'm kind of fucked. Now there was one that came out in the 2000 era, and I think they were like 6 years they were together. That was a pretty good combination, and had Chris Cornell, who I really liked his voice from Soundgarden, Temple of the Dog, all that stuff. He hooked up with the three members of Rage Against the Machine, not named Zach De La Roca. So you had the Tom Morello and the guys, and they formed Audioslave. Now Audioslave caught my attention because I thought, man, I heard about going to have Chris Cornell and the guys from Rage together. Thought, man, that'll never work. That's like apples and oranges. Boy, did they make it work though. That first Audioslave album, especially, was just it wasn't what I expected by any means. It leaned more towards Soundgarden-ish than it did Rage, but it was still great vocals. Melodies were good. I mean, it Like a Stone is still one of the best fucking songs. And that's Cornell at his best, and Morello's funky guitar solos, that he can do and stuff. Bands like Mudvayne and Static X and all them, I never really got into those. I just didn't get into like the industrial sounding stuff, except for Prong. I did like Prong a lot. I guess I kind of missed the boat with Prong too. I was still listening to Prong, Helmet, White Zombie. I think was in this time frame, or maybe they were in the '90s. I don't even remember. But I wasn't listening to a lot of White Zombie. I had never been a White Zombie, Rob Zombie fan, so it kind of just didn't happen for me there. Striper, of course, was still, even though they hadn't really released anything since '90, I would still go back and listen to the Yellow and Black Attack and Soldiers Under Command, To Hell with the Devil, and In God We Trust, and even Against the Law, which wasn't their best. And they would come out in 2005 and finally come back, with the Reborn album. So I thought, okay, here's Striper back, and then Michael Sweet from Striper did some touring with Boston, which was incredible. I wish I'd have got to see one of those shows. That's probably the show I would have wanted to see the most. And I try to think of the 2000s shows that were really good. I remember one in a little barn, like outbuilding, kind of, sort of. I mean, it was nicer than an outbuilding, but it was down in a church, Tip City area. And they actually had Skillet play there with 1,000 Foot Crutch. And I was like, whoa. That was pretty cool, you know, in that intimate a setting. And it was like, I had never really paid much attention to Skillet, but that was the first time I saw Skillet, and I thought they were very impressive. And I saw them again here this last summer, still very good. So 2000s, you know, between the band I was in and listening to some other stuff like the emo stuff, and right at the end of the you know, Gwen Stacy kind of got me into listening to the heavier metalcore-ish emo type stuff. Right at the end, I started a tad bit on symphonic metal too, like Stradivarius and Nightwish, like I talked about. You know, stuff like that was going on. I didn't really listen to like some of these bands on this list. They're just not what I would dig. You know, they're not what I listen to. I did listen to Lamb of God later, but I remember Lamb of God. But here's some albums. Then I got some albums from the 2000s, and I'm trying to think like Slipknot's Iowa. Yeah, that was good. That was a hell of a sophomore effort from Slipknot. They kind of fell off for me after the Iowa album, to be honest. And they had some songs here and there from then on that would catch my attention, you know, like the Heretic and the one out Duality and stuff, Psychosocial songs like that later. But Iowa, you know, people equal shit, and just it was a little more hard, kind of like the first album. Then I think they kind of softened a little bit, but I'm not going to say soften because I don't think Slipknot can soften except for maybe Snuff, you know. But Iron Maiden had like Brand New World. I didn't Brave New World. I didn't care about any of that stuff. I really fell off of Iron Maiden, to be honest, after like Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. I mean, I was a big fan for Killers. I was a big fan for Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind, Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son. What was it? Power Slave. And then I kind of just, you know, when in Brave New World, I don't even know that I listened to a lot of that. But that was 2000. I'm sure they had other albums come out. Now these aren't going to name. This is just a list of albums and which ones I liked. Like I'll go down some of them that I had. God, I Hates Us All. I remember that because I was seeing Slayer on that tour, but it was early in the decade of 2010s. Hybrid Theory, of course, they listed at 99. I listed at 99. I thought it was 99. They listed at 2000, but I think it was 90. The Audio Slave album I talked about that came out 2002, according to here. There was some like Alice in Chains that was trying to hang around, and later in the decade, Black Gives Way to Blue. Now, I didn't care for that. I think if I'm remembering right, I don't know if that's the one that had Check My Brain on it or not. Maybe that was something. I get them all mixed up. I'm not a deep diver on Alice in Chains like the first couple albums I was. Let's go down some of them if I can remember. None of those really. See, there's a lot of them I don't even re, even remember even listening to. The Sickness by Disturbed, that had a lot of hits. And I wasn't a Disturbed fan at first. I went to see them the very first time, and they were the headliner that night. And I said, you know what? We're out of here. I had already seen the bands I had wanted to see. I think Godsmack was right before them, and there was Megadeth or something. It was like a Mayhem Festival type thing. And I was like, yeah, let's scoot. That was later, but I'm just saying I never really listened to a lot of Disturbed. I wish I would have now because I do like them now. I mean, not like oh man, I miss so much, but respect when you see them live. I guess I should have stuck around that night, and I would have probably liked them instead of waiting for all those years. Now here's one. Oh, Nightwish. The Wishmaster album was what got me in Nightwish. And I remember that one was like a surprise to me. I'm like, what is this? You know, I'm like, well, it's tasty. The End of Heartache, that album by Killswitch. top notch. That was top notch album. I have that. I still have it on CD somewhere around here. But there's band I've been kind of missing out to tell, and they were big for me for a long time. Was Clutch. Clutch, yeah, Clutch. I missed a lot of the stuff that in the '90s. I listened to Clutch not like I would later in my life, but this album in 2004, Blast Tyrant, that's the one that kind of turned it for me. That's the one that kind of said, man, I think this band's got, there's something different because I'd heard some of the earlier stuff and I hadn't really got it until I heard Blast Tyrant. And then from Blast Tyrant on, it was probably the next, God, I want to say 10 years solid, maybe even, yeah, all the way up through X-Ray Vision. So what's that, 2017, 18? So for a little over a decade, they were kind of big on my list after that. And I mean, but they're big on my list is like the rotating ADHD world of Mikey Brown. That's what I have a problem with. Oh, Pantera. I see it now. That gets me in a lot of trouble with people because I'm not this huge Pantera fan. I did like Cowboys from Hell, and I did like Vulgar Display of Power. And I like the live. I had the live. I still have the live CD, 151 proof or whatever it is. I don't hate Pantera, but I'm not like jumping over the moon for them either. And they had the album come out right at the end or right at the beginning of the decade, Reinventing the Steel. I don't even know if I remember any of that. Just did not follow Pantera, and I probably never will. Even with Charlie and Zach in the band now, it's not like this major draw. I know a lot of people know, I can't wait to go see Pantera. But I don't know. I'd rather see Anthrax and Black Label with those two guys than and see Anselmo in Down and even see Rex and Kill City Hill or whatever the hell it was that he was in. I only knew a couple songs of there. But Black Label Society, and speaking of them, they had a hell of an album come out, Stronger Than Death. It came out right at the beginning of the. I didn't hear that until actually till about 2 3 years ago. I seen it on there on a list, and it's good, but no, Evanescence was one. They had that album that was big for them, Fallen. That was huge, and I don't know that I've ever heard another Evanescence album. I've heard like a song off of it, maybe or two. But here they are 20 years later, still touring. And I don't know if they've got more than a couple albums. I don't know. Maybe they're just one of those types. They just go on their nostalgia and tour. Could be a lot of things. But like I said, I was starting to get into the heavier side of things when I heard Gwen Stacy. And I got into that vibe, the tempo changes and the angry vocals and the melodic guitars and the melodic vocals. And then at that time, I really got it when I started getting more into Clutch. That style, that rough and tumble style, brought me around back to Crowbar, who I'd heard before, but never really dove into. So Crowbar was what I was kind of listening to with Gwen Stacy at the time. As we reached the end of the 2000s, that's when I found Kingdom of Sorrow. I think they're officially 2010 released, the first album. So I'll talk about them more on the next one because they were pretty, only in a couple albums, but they were pretty influential for me. Because I don't have, you take guys like Hatebreed and mix them with Crowbar. That's nice. That's nice. It's kind of like Down, you take I Hate God, Corrosion of Conformity, Down, and Pantera. Or Down. Crowbar and Pantera. And put them all together. That's why Down was so, in the mid 90s. Like I said, I don't talk about every band, but the mid 90s, that first couple albums, Down and Down One and Down Two, off the chain, and still seeing them live would still be cool today because of those songs that were on the Down album. And I'm trying to cover everything I listen to in a half hour. So that's why I miss so much shit. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm getting the heavier music's becoming more appealing as we head into the 2010s, and Kingdom of Sorrow will flip the switch for me. And another thing about me is like I get a little depressed and mulled down. Not really depressed, but just kind of rutted in with music. If I don't have something new that kind of says shakes the foundations and says, "Oh, here," jumps out, says, "Look at me and listen to me." But I've been fortunate through most of my life that every so often that happens. Like every 5, 7 years, but usually pretty much like clockwork. From the hair bands that went to the grunge to a little bit to Weezer's first album and Korn and all that. Then you jumped into 5 years later, it's Hybrid Theory and it's Slipknot. And then here we go in 2007 or 8, whatever it is, with Gwen Stacy, and it introduces yet another genre into my already overwhelmed capacity as a music lover. It's another genre to deal with, and it's like not complaining. It's just so hard to keep up sometimes and even remember all these bands and try to fit them into a half hour talk, a half hour, 40 minutes, whatever I do, talking about my life related. So the 2000s, yeah, my personal band was kicking in a little bit more, and my heavier side was coming out. So, and everybody else was pretty solid. I mean, it was just nothing that other than the Gwen Stacy that I think shook me to my core. I mean, like Audio Slave was great. When it came out, I was like, oh, it's pleasant, good. Evanescence coming out was good. Shine Down. I really jumped on Shine Down after about the second album, not really the first album, but second album. I really kind of started listening to them, but not forefront. I just kind of heard them. Wouldn't be till I got married to my current wife that when she really turned me on to listening to more Shinedown. I was like very thankful for that. And she's also a big Hailstorm fan. She gets me to listen to that. And 3 Days Grace, she was big on 3 Days Grace, and I thought it was a little wimpy. And then I listened to it, it's like it's not bad. And I'm actually looking forward to at least hearing some more, or possibly even get to see 3 Days Grace now that they have introduced Adam back into the band, and they're going to have both singers doing so. That's kind of cool. I mean, it's kind of like when Jesse Leach and Howard Jones did a song together for Killswitch Engage. I thought it was fantastic. And I'm glad that everybody can get along like that. And music's beautiful for that. It sometimes tears people apart, but other times it can bring people smack together. And it's fantastic that it does that. So when we get next time, hopefully you'll come back and we'll get to dive into the heavier side of what I get into in the 2010s. There's a couple oddballs in there that I really listen to as far as maybe alternative and not real heavy, but most of it's heavy. I mean, most of the 2010s for me is heavy. And my favorite band I got to say, will probably leaning towards my favorite band of all time, I discover in the 2010s. So it should be an interesting half hour or so on the next episode. So I do thank you for hanging out and going through the 2000s decade of music with me. I always have a good time doing the show, and I hope you enjoy it too. Like and subscribe to our Moshmin channel if you like everything music, episodes, this show, live streams. Kind of hit everything, and we hit all kinds of music that's at least rock. I mean, rock to metal, and farther for me more than Skeeter, but yeah, it's fun. It's a good time. So, as I always say, live, laugh, love, and listen to music every day. Till next time, this is Moshin Mikey from the Moshmen and the Rock and Roll Roundtable. Thanks for having me, or thanks for coming out to another episode of Mosh Bagosh. We'll see you later.